Somewhere in France, a 7-year-old boy sat in front of a glowing television screen with his brother beside him. The PlayStation had just loaded Final Fantasy VIII. Guillaume Broche picked up the controller and immediately hit a wall he didn't know existed. He couldn't read. Guillaume looked at the screen, battle menus and dialogue boxes and tutorial text, none of it making any sense. Just meaningless symbols to a kid who hadn't learned his letters yet. See, Final Fantasy VIII wasn't designed for 7-year-olds who couldn't read. The game was text-heavy, menu-driven, asking players to make strategic decisions based on information they needed to read and understand. His brother helped where he could, and Guillaume learned to recognize the auto-attack command, not by reading it, but by its shape and placement on the screen. The pattern of the letters he couldn't actually understand became his anchor point in an ocean of incomprehensible text. And then he hit Elvoret. The first real boss in Final Fantasy VIII waited atop the Dalek communication tower, and Guillaume couldn't get past it. Every attempt ended the same way, the boss attacking, the screen fading to black, those 2 words appearing in letters he still couldn't fully understand. Game over. This fight demanded more than button mashing. It required reading the menus fast enough to execute strategy, understanding which commands did what, managing resources Guillaume couldn't even identify by name. His brother tried to help, but eventually Guillaume had to figure it out on his own. So he kept playing. Attempt after attempt, death after death, something began to happen. Through sheer repetition and pattern recognition and refusing to quit on this game he loved, Guillaume started recognizing words. Not from a classroom or a textbook, but from a video game he cared enough about to decode letter by letter, menu by menu, battle by battle. He beat Elvoret and kept playing Final Fantasy VIII all the way to the end. By the time those credits rolled, Guillaume Broche could read. Not perfectly, but functionally. Enough to navigate a text-heavy JRPG on his own and start chasing more of these worlds built from text and imagination. JRPGs flooded the PlayStation library in those years, and Guillaume consumed them all. Persona, Suikoden, the Atelier series, Legend of Dragoon, and Shin Megami Tensei, all played with the same intensity he brought to Final Fantasy VIII. Single-player games played as a 2-person experience. His brother stayed through most of it, taking turns with the controller and figuring things out together. One kid who couldn't read had become 2 brothers, building a shared world through the games they loved. The collection grew over the years, and the hours kept accumulating. Hundreds, then thousands, spread across dozens of different games. By the time Guillaume reached his teenage years, he'd absorbed everything those games had to teach. Turn-based combat, narrative structure, and character progression. All of it. But somewhere along the way, something changed. University came eventually. Guillaume met a guy named Francois Maurice, and they became drinking buddies. The kind who stayed loosely connected after graduation through occasional messages, keeping tabs on each other's lives without being particularly close. Francois would go into business. Guillaume had other plans forming, though they weren't clear yet, but they stayed in touch, and that would matter later. Guillaume wasn't studying game development, no computer science degree, no formal design training, but the desire to create was overtaking the desire to just play. So he did what he'd always done. He taught himself. YouTube tutorials became his classroom. The same method that taught him to read through Final Fantasy VIII now taught him game development. Repetition, trial and error, refusing to quit when the logic didn't click the first time. By the time university ended, Guillaume had built a foundation of sorts. Expert-level knowledge of JRPGs from over a decade of obsessive play, self-taught technical skills from countless hours of online learning, and Francois's contact saved in his phone. What he lacked was credentials. No portfolio, no industry connections to open doors at major studios. But in 2014, Ubisoft's Paris office was hiring. They needed people for Might and Magic, a classic RPG franchise being revived for a new generation. They wanted developers who understood role-playing games at a deep, instinctive level, people who lived and breathed the genre. They looked at Guillaume Broche, self-taught, unproven, without a single shipped game to his name, and somehow decided to take a chance on him. Over a decade after a 7-year-old boy couldn't read the words on his television screen, Guillaume Broche walked into Ubisoft as a professional game developer. "2014, Paris. Ubisoft's office towers rose against the skyline. floors packed with hundreds of developers building some of the biggest franchises in gaming. Guillaume Broche started there as an intern on the Might and Magic franchise, working directly under the creative director. He picked things up fast. Ubisoft promoted him to assistant creative director, which gave him his first real look at how AAA games got built from the inside. And for a while, it worked. But in 2015, he left Ubisoft for what looked like a step up. Assistant brand manager at Microsoft's Xbox division on their marketing team. It took him a few months to realize he'd made the wrong call. Marketing meant promoting games, not building them. And in his own words, it just wasn't his thing. He wanted to create stuff. So he left Microsoft and returned to Ubisoft in 2017, back to where he'd started, but this time as associate producer. Creative production, building actual games. Ghost Recon Breakpoint entered development that year, followed shortly by The Division 2. But then a different kind of problem started showing up. Both titles were being built around live service models, microtransactions, season passes, and loot boxes, with predatory monetization and rushed development timelines. The Division 2 shipped March 15, 2019. Ghost Recon Breakpoint launched October 4th that same year. Both games carried the monetization systems corporate had mandated, and Guillaume had worked through their entire development cycles watching business priorities override creative ones. He described those years with one word: bored. Not frustrated, not burned out, bored. Capable of the work, but wanting something different. And somewhere in 2019, Guillaume did the math. To pitch a JRPG at Ubisoft, anything with a real budget, he'd have to navigate the corporate hierarchy and climb high enough for his pitch to actually get heard. That wasn't how long the game would take to build, but how long it would take just to reach a position where someone might listen. 25 years. Stay at Ubisoft and keep climbing. Try another studio or start something on his own. He'd already been making things on the side. In 2016, he'd posted on Reddit about a narrative 2D platformer he was building in his spare time. So in 2019, still at Ubisoft, he started building something far more ambitious. Ubisoft had sent him to Shanghai that year, narrative director and product manager on a mobile Heroes of Might and Magic game, the day job. Evenings and weekends, he was working on something else entirely. He called it We Lost. A JRPG set in steampunk Victorian England, built around real-time turn-based combat with action timing and parry mechanics. Characters named Mel, Loon, and Verso navigated a world of zombies and aliens and dragons, darker and more futuristic than what would eventually become Expedition 33. But the foundation was already there, including the cinematic approach to presentation that would carry through to the final game. Guillaume experimented with multiple game engines before settling on Unreal. The prototype was crude, more proof of concept than playable game, but it proved the concept, and he wasn't building alone. A colleague named Tom Gillerman, who'd been working on Beyond Good and Evil 2 at Ubisoft, started collaborating on the prototype. Guillaume in Shanghai, Tom in France, both still working full-time, trading files remotely, and pushing the project forward in whatever hours they could find. By early 2020, they were roughly 6 months in. The combat system worked, the visual direction was clear, not ready to pitch to publishers, but real enough to believe in. But then, COVID-19 hit, shutting down offices and forcing everyone into isolation. For Guillaume, the pandemic became a catalyst. Not because it created the desire to leave, but because it sharpened everything he'd already been feeling. October 2020, Guillaume Broche left Ubisoft and founded Sandfall Interactive. Just him and Tom in a prototype called We Lost. No publisher, no funding, and no team beyond the two of them. But building a game requires a lot more than two people and a prototype. Officially, it started with Francois. Summer 2020, Guillaume needed someone to handle the business side, the administrative work, the relationships, the fundraising, all the parts of running a company that weren't about making the game itself. He thought of Francois Maurice, a friend from university he'd stayed loosely connected with over the years. They'd been drinking buddies, part of the same student association, and stayed in touch through occasional messages after graduation. Francois had gone into business, spent 3.5 years at Marcel, a French transportation company, with zero game industry experience. Guillaume picked up the phone and asked Francois if he would quit a stable job to join an unproven game startup with no funding and no guarantee of success. Francois agreed almost instantly and quit Marcel the following week. By September 2020, both of them were working full-time on what would become Sandfall Interactive, with Francois as chief of operations, spending his days calling everyone he knew, trying to scrape together enough funding to keep the lights on. Unofficially, Francois wasn't actually the first impossible discovery. That had happened months earlier, back in April, while Guillaume was still at Ubisoft building We Lost on the side. He needed voice actors for a technical test, just people willing to record some lines for free. So he posted on Reddit, username Donpoco, subreddit r/voiceacting. Free voice actors for a passion project. No pay, just helping out. Halfway across the world in Australia, a woman named Jennifer Svedberg-Yen was scrolling through Reddit because there was absolutely nothing else to do. She was locked down in Parramatta, dance classes and martial arts and everything else, all cancelled. Just sitting at home, bored, with hours to kill. She saw Guillaume's post. She'd never done voice acting before, but she figured she could try. So she sent Guillaume a message, did some random voices for his technical test, and afterward, they started talking about the story he was building. Jennifer mentioned she could help with the dialogue, and when Guillaume read what she wrote, he realized she had talent. Real talent, not just enthusiasm. They kept talking, the conversations deepened, moving from dialogue help into full story development. By late 2020, Jennifer wasn't just doing voices anymore. She was co-building the narrative Bible for We Lost, working on story structure, becoming Guillaume's primary creative collaborator. When Sandfall was officially founded in October, she was part of the core 6-person team as lead writer and voice and localization producer. Now, Guillaume needed a composer, and he found one through an even stranger coincidence. Laurien Testard was a guitar teacher in France who'd been composing music as a hobby. 1 track per week posted to SoundCloud over the course of a year. 50 tracks total, all hobbyist work, nothing professional. One day, Laurien made a post on a tiny random music forum he'd never visited before and would never post on again. And somehow, out of the entire internet, Guillaume happened to see it. He clicked through to Laurien's SoundCloud, fell in love with the sound, and sent an email asking if Laurien would compose the soundtrack for We Lost. Laurien accepted immediately. It was his first professional game music job, so he kept teaching guitar on the side while composing remotely. Then COVID hit, and suddenly Laurien couldn't teach students anymore. His income from guitar lessons vanished, so he quit teaching entirely and went full-time on the game. At this point, Guillaume still needed an art director. He spent hours browsing ArtStation, building ranked lists of artists whose work he loved. Nicolas Maxime Francombe was number 1 on the list, the artist Guillaume wanted most, the one he fully expected to say no. Nicolas had been working in events management, creating illustrations and concept art for circus-style productions, painting vibrant elements onto empty sets. He'd never worked in games, and then COVID shut down the events industry. Not many circuses running during a pandemic. Guillaume sent the email anyway, offering Nicolas the art director role. He'd already prepared a second list, a third list, backup options for when everyone on the first list turned him down. Nicolas came on board within hours. Just yes. Guillaume never needed the backup lists. So there was Francois, the drinking buddy who quit a stable job. Jennifer, discovered on Reddit, who'd never done voice acting in her life. Laurien, found through a random forum post. Nicolas, the top choice who came through when every expectation said he wouldn't. And Tom Gillerman, Guillaume's colleague from Ubisoft, still working there during the day but collaborating on We Lost in his spare time, building the technical foundation for the reactive turn-based combat system. October 2020, Sandfall Interactive officially founded. 6 people on the team, aside from Tom and Guillaume, none of them had worked together before, and most of them had never worked in games at all. They'd come together through Reddit posts and random forums and cold emails, and one phone call to an old friend, all during a pandemic that had shut everything else down. And somehow, it worked. Now they needed a story worth telling. "2020. Guillaume kept circling back to the same problem. The story felt generic. Zombies and aliens and dragons in steampunk England could have been anyone's game. It wasn't theirs. The team started brainstorming what could make their game different, and Guillaume had an idea he'd been turning over for a while. A doomsday clock. Every year, a painted figure called the Paintress appears and paints a number in the sky, and everyone whose age matches that number dies. No negotiation, no escape, just death by magical decree. The concept was strong, but there was nothing underneath it. Who was the Paintress? Why was she doing this? The mechanics of the threat were clear, but the meaning behind it was hollow, and no amount of brainstorming was fixing that. And then Jennifer remembered something she'd been working on privately, completely unrelated to the game. A short story based on a dream she'd had, about a young woman who'd lost her mother at an early age, only to discover later that her mother was actually alive. The mother could enter paintings, travel through them, and she'd become trapped inside one. The daughter had to go into the painting to rescue her. Jennifer mentioned it to Guillaume, and they started talking through how it could work with the doomsday clock. How the dream could explain who the Paintress was, what she was doing, and maybe even create the story beneath the story. It wasn't a perfect fit yet, but the bones were there, and both of them could feel it. The piece they were missing was the emotional catalyst. Why would a mother enter a painting in the first place? What would drive someone to make that choice? Guillaume went to his own mother and asked her, what would be the worst thing that could happen to you? She answered immediately, losing him, losing any of her children. And that answer became the reason the Paintress went into the painting. Jennifer's dream characters found their way into the game. The daughter became Maëlle. The grandfather from her original story became Renoir the father, and the mother became Aileen, the Paintress. They added more family around that core, and the story expanded outward from grief and love, parent and child. But the story still needed a world, and We Lost had been set in Victorian England. The team was in France, they were French, so why tell a story about Victorian England when they could tell something closer to their own culture? Someone suggested Belle Epoque France, that golden period between 1871 and 1914, when Paris was transforming into the City of Light and Impressionist painters were revolutionizing how people saw the world. It was beautiful, it was French, and it was almost completely unexplored in games. They knew the culture intimately because they'd grown up surrounded by it, and Nicholas wanted to create something that felt genuinely different from the recycled fantasy settings everyone had already seen 1,000 times. The new setting would give him that canvas. So they made the call. We Lost became Clair Obscur Expedition 33. Turn of the century France, a mother trapped in paintings, a daughter leading an expedition to save her. The character names stayed, Maëlle and Lune and Verso. But everything else transformed. Steampunk gave way to Art Nouveau elegance, and the gameplay now served a story that actually meant something to the people building it. 6 months of work on We Lost, gone. A complete reboot built from a dream, a mother's answer, and a French team deciding to tell a French story. Now they had to build it, and that was going to be the hardest part. Early 2021. Sandfall had 6 to 8 people, a vision that felt perfect, and a rebooted prototype showing real promise. What they didn't have was money. Guillaume and Francois needed funding, and in the gaming industry, the obvious path was finding a publisher willing to back them. So they started taking meetings. They'd walk in with their prototype, lay out the vision, and wait for a response, and the response kept being no. It was the timing more than anything because Sandfall was still recovering from the We Lost reboot, and they didn't have a vertical slice, nothing playable, nothing publishers could hold in their hands and say yes to. But one meeting stood out. Alexis Gaverion, CEO of Kepler Interactive, sat across from Guillaume, and even though the conversation didn't lead to a deal, something clicked between them. The vibes were excellent, Guillaume said later. Really excellent. He filed that away. Then they tried venture capital, and the timing was even worse. This was 2021, peak metaverse mania, and every VC in the industry was chasing blockchain gaming and NFT ecosystems and Web3 platforms. Guillaume and Francois walked into those meetings with a single-player JRPG that had no blockchain and no live service model, just a story about grief and a mother who disappeared into a painting. The VCs passed. So Francois went the scrappy route. Friends first, then family, then angel investors, convincing them one conversation at a time. He scraped together just enough to keep the lights on. Then, late 2021, 3 grants arrived almost simultaneously, 2 from the French government and $50,000 from Epic Games through their Mega Grants program. Combined, the grants gave them enough runway to build a vertical slice for GDC 2022. The team started growing beyond the core 6, mostly junior developers and first-time game industry hires, and everyone wore multiple hats because small teams required it. The soundtrack still needed a voice though, and that's how Lorien found Alice Duport-Percier. She'd been posting video game music covers on YouTube with a group called Grissini Project, doing classical arrangements of Final Fantasy and Nier Automata in churches across France. Lorien watched her videos and sent an email, and Alice said yes. Once a month, she'd travel to a studio to record, and they kept that rhythm going for 3 years. Lorien would compose the track and share how he felt about the emotional context, and then Alice would build a vocal line from whatever the music made her feel. He described her simply as the voice of an angel. By March 2022, they had a vertical slice ready and flew to GDC in San Francisco to show it. What happened there, the publisher reactions, the media interest, most of it went unrecorded. They didn't secure a deal. They kept building anyway. Mid-2022, Epic released Unreal Engine 5, and Tom Guillermin made the call to migrate even though it meant rebuilding months of lighting work they'd already finished in UE4. He'd later call it a game changer. And so, they threw out what they had and rebuilt. And then Guillaume hit a wall finding animators. He needed high-quality combat animation, something anime influenced and technically sophisticated, and he searched France and then all of Europe without finding anyone who did that kind of work. So he went to YouTube and started watching animation reels, and he noticed something. Every animator whose style matched what he needed was based in Korea. He made a list and started sending emails, approximately 200 of them. One person responded. His name was Sang-Yoon. He went by Kim Won-kyung online, and Guillaume watched his work and knew immediately. Sang-Yoon joined and invited his animator friends, and eventually 8 Korean animators were working on the combat systems, all part-time. Every single one kept their regular day jobs in Korea and worked on Expedition 33 at night and on weekends. Guillaume had sent 200 emails hoping for one, and it ended up with 8. By 2023, the team had grown to around 25 to 30 people and moved into a period mansion near Montpellier's historic center, an actual building from the era they were trying to recreate digitally. And Guillaume remembered something from early 2021. That meeting with Alexis Gavrian at Kepler, and those excellent vibes he couldn't shake. March 2023, he reached back out, and this time the conversation went differently. Sandfall had a vertical slice, a growing team, a successful migration to UE5, and 8 Korean animators found through cold outreach. They had proof they could actually build what they were pitching. Kepler said yes. The deal came with complete creative freedom, which was the deciding factor for Francois after Guillaume's years watching corporate priorities override creative vision at Ubisoft. The budget was under $10 million. Kepler would handle marketing and bring in voice talent, which is how Sandfall ended up with Charlie Cox, Andy Serkis, and Ben Starr. 2 years since every publisher said no, Sandfall finally had a partner. Summer 2023, they brought Expedition 33 to Gamescom in Cologne and showed it to the public for the first time. Players loved it. The team could stop wondering if they'd survive long enough to finish and start focusing entirely on the game, with April 24, 2025 as the target. That fall, voice recording sessions began at studios in the UK, and Jennifer Svedberg-Yen found herself across from Charlie Cox, preparing to direct him through the script she'd written. She was terrified. She described it as an existential panic, the kind that comes from remembering you got this job because you were bored during COVID and responded to a stranger on Reddit, and now Daredevil is about to perform your words. The session started, and Cox performed the lines, and Jennifer had chills. Her words coming alive through his voice in ways she could never have imagined when she was doing random voice tests over Discord 4 years earlier. She described the whole experience as surreal, listening to these amazing actors bring the lines to life and thinking, those are the words I wrote. The Reddit responder was directing Hollywood. June 10th, 2024, the Xbox Games Showcase. nearly 4 years of building in secret, and now the world was about to see it. The trailer dropped during the global livestream, showing turn-of-the-century France in full UE5 glory, and people who'd never heard of Sandfall Interactive were suddenly talking about a French indie JRPG. Through the rest of 2024 and into early 2025, the hype kept building. The world was watching now. April 22nd, 2025, 2 days before launch. Bethesda shadow dropped Oblivion Remastered onto Game Pass. A beloved RPG classic, now free for every subscriber on the exact same platform where Expedition 33 was about to debut. Guillaume admitted later that the team was pretty nervous about it, and he would be lying if he said otherwise, because here they were, a 30-person studio, about to go head-to-head with one of gaming's biggest franchises, with the competition already live and free. Then, the review embargo lifted on April 23rd. Metacritic came in at 92 out of 100, and Edge magazine gave Expedition 33 a perfect 10 out of 10. Only the 28th time in their 32 years of publishing that they'd ever awarded a perfect score. Launch day was April 24th, and in the first 24 hours, Sandfall sold 500,000 copies. Not Game Pass downloads, but actual purchases at roughly $50 each from people who could have played for free. By day 3, they'd hit 1 million. 2 weeks later, 2 million. And then, day 33 happened. May 27th, 2025. Exactly 33 days after launch, Sandfall announced the latest milestone, 3,300,000 copies sold. 3.3 million on day 33 of Expedition 33. Nobody planned it, the numbers just aligned on their own, and the internet lost its mind over it because sometimes a coincidence is so perfect that it feels like the universe is in on the joke. The success kept compounding through summer and fall in ways nobody had expected. Lorien's soundtrack hit number 1 on Billboard's classical albums chart, which meant the guitar teacher who'd been posting hobbyist tracks to SoundCloud 5 years earlier was now topping the same charts as mainstream albums. Alice became one of the most streamed French artists in the United States. Macron posted congratulations. By October, total sales had passed 5 million copies, and Lorien had won the World Soundtrack Award, becoming the first video game composer to receive the honor. And somewhere in all of that, Sandfall began to realize they might be in the running for something bigger. December 2025 was approaching, which meant the Game Awards, gaming's biggest night, and Expedition 33 had been nominated. "13 nominations, more than any game in Game Awards history. Someone on the team floated an idea for the ceremony, a joke really, because they were going to be the first French game ever nominated for Game of the Year, so why not lean into it? Berets and striped shirts, the whole ridiculous stereotype. It started as a joke, and they wore them anyway. December 11th, 2025, the ceremony opened with live music from the Expedition 33 soundtrack, Lorien's compositions and Alice's voice filling the venue before a single award had been announced. And then the wins started coming, one after another, and the team kept going back up to the stage in their berets. Someone later said they had no idea what was happening, just a surreal blur of walking up and accepting and walking back down and doing it again. 9 awards by the end of the night. The Last of Us Part 2 had held a record at 7. Then came the final category, Game of the Year 2025. Clair Obscur Expedition 33. First French game to win in 11 years of Game Awards history. Guillaume walked to the stage. He thanked his team. He thanked Kepler for giving them creative freedom when nobody else would. And then he thanked YouTube tutorials for teaching him Unreal Engine, the free videos that helped a self-taught developer build a Game of the Year winner. And you could hear something shift in the room because that's not what people usually say from that stage. And then he thanked someone else. A personal thank you, he said, to an important man in his life. Hironobu Sakaguchi, the creator of Final Fantasy. The man who made him fall in love with games in the first place. 21 years earlier, a 7-year-old kid sat in front of a TV in France, struggling through Final Fantasy VIII's battle menus because he couldn't read yet. He learned to recognize the auto-attack command by its shape on the screen. He beat Elvaret through sheer repetition because he loved that world too much to give up, and somewhere along the way, he taught himself to read. And now, that kid was standing on the Game Awards stage, holding the trophy, thanking the man who started it all. Sakaguchi saw it. He responded on social media that night, congratulating them on their outstanding work. And someone on the team put it perfectly. What a weird timeline for us. None of them knew the others existed. All of them said yes when it mattered.